Greetings, Kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome to my World of Darkness. Today is going to be the third episode of the Thicker Than Water recap. For those of you who have never seen anything of this series, this is the series where I recap everything that happened in the chronicle that I am personally running right now. Thicker Than Water is a story that I've been tinkering with for over a decade, but I have found that the narrative of Styx and Bones, which is found in Cults of the Blood Gods, works phenomenally in my story. And it helps to bring the Hekata in to full view without just saying they were always like that. The story of Styx and Bones is set in Munich, Germany, but it's supposed to be an event that's happening all over the world. So it really does fit wherever you want. You could change NPCs if you wanted to. I've changed a couple, but for the most part, I've stuck with as the story states. Chapter 1 went swimmingly. Chapter 2, we didn't get to last week because when we were doing game, I asked them what their in-weeks were going to be, and it just kind of imploded into that, and we spent over 4 hours working on just in-weeks. However, we did get to Chapter 2, Grave Digging, this week, and I have come to regale you with the machinations that have been set in motion due to the small coterie of Portland, Oregon, which consists of Dawn Rose, Sam Heron, Tinia Jabbar, and Damian Hargrave. In this episode, we open with a dream. The hot, sticky summer night air clings to your limbs. In the darkness, you pass through a well-manicured green park and approach a gazebo-like structure that appears Chinese in inspiration. The footfalls on the cold concrete make clapping sounds as you reach the first of 5 stories. You climb the spiral staircase to the upper levels and pass open-air balconies one on top of the other to form a tower. Each step brings you closer to your intended prey. The smell of flesh and blood assaults your nostrils as he finally comes into view. A wealthy man with sandy blonde hair, wearing a long wool coat, leans against the balcony. He takes a long drag from his cigarettes while he scrolls through the news feeds on his phone. From surprise, you strike, snatching one hand and twisting it hard. Bones and sinew snap as he yells in pain, dropping his phone, and reels in horror. Before he realizes the true danger, his own shadow snakes around his throat, waistline, and free hand. He struggles against your attack, but lacks the immortal strength of a being such as you. Your fangs extend, and you bite hard into his throat. You gorge yourself on hot blood. As the man's heart slows, he goes limp. He's powerless to stop you as you use the shadow to pull, stretching flesh and bone. You tear a single arm from the socket, thrilling at the sound of ripping flesh and wrenching muscle. With his one arm in your hand, you toss the corpse from the tower and smile when it lands with a hard, crunchy thud on the concrete below. All the members of the coterie woke up to that dream. No matter where they were, no matter what they did the night before. They all woke up to that dream. But they also woke up surrounded by agents of the Camarilla Prince, James Merrick. For Tinia, Damian, and Sam, they woke up in the Benson Hotel in their suites that they're using while they're supposed to be guarding the Asanos. As for Dawn, she woke up in the property recently purchased by Sam and Brittany on the outskirts of town. The big difference here is where Dawn woke up with a couple of suited agents surrounding her, led by Arthur Lawrence Mason, child of the prince and deputy to the sheriff. The rest of our coterie awoke surrounded by agents and the sheriff himself, Jacob Monroff, a Nosferatu who has been around since the city's inception and has a tendency to kill first and never ask questions. Both groups are searched, their weapons and phones taken from them and placed in a bag. However, Dawn didn't have a phone still on her, and when they decided that they were going to frisk and search the other coterie, Sam decided to get snippy with the sheriff, making kissy faces at him and telling them how he can search him whenever he wants to. He then exposed himself and said, "Here's my weapon." The sheriff didn't take kindly to this and decided that he was going to teach the young Brujah Anarch a lesson and remove what he was showing him. With a sickly pop and a slight tear, the sheriff was able to remove the exposed body part. He was very confused on how simple that was and how there was no pain on Sam, who continued making kissy faces at him and telling him that he could keep that for later. The sheriff indeed pocketed the item, and the vampires were forced downstairs into two waiting vans below. Their items in one van and them in the other. Rose had a little bit easier of a trip, where she was also escorted into a van, and they were driven across town over into the St. James area, where they came across a theme restaurant known as Hansel's and Gretel's. Hansel and Gretel's is not in Portland, Oregon. It's one of those places, again, that is in Munich, Germany. However, it was such an ideal location that I felt I needed to put it there. And Portland, Oregon is so fucking weird, I figured it would fit anyway. So, as quickly as the coterie was awakened by unpleasant dreams by uninvited guests, they're whisked away to Hansel and Gretel's. Once inside the restaurant, the sheriff delivers them to a large back room with polished stone floors, marble tables, and black and white drawings lining the walls depicting scenes from various tales from the Brothers Grimm. The room is cold and uninviting. In addition to several armed ghouls, James Merrick, the Prince of Portland, sits at one of the tables. Seated behind him in a back booth is the Seneschal, Anton Dracon, and Anna Roma, the herald and harpy of the city. While the herald takes handwritten notes, Anton eyes Sam with suspicion as Jacob Monroff whispers in his ear. The prince lifts his head from his paperwork, and after taking time to memorize each of the characters' faces, he nods. Introduce yourselves. This is a much colder version of the prince than they're used to seeing. Sam and Dawn met the prince one time when they were first being brought into the city of Portland. They were taken to a structure known as the Silver Screen, which is a nightclub with large movie screens hanging from the ceiling where there's constantly old black and white movies being played. It's owned by one of the Toreador of the city. There was a large poker game being played by all the major Camarilla players in the city. The prince seemed jovial and happy. He was in a public building. He seemed flush with life. He had a rosy tint to his cheek, and he barely had anything to say to these two anarchs that were being brought in and introduced by Hesharudas, the ministry member who seemed to be on good standings with the Camarilla here. This time, he's darker. His skin is cold, and there is no sense of life in his face. He's obviously not trying to be human here. Tinia has a much different view of this prince. She was a member of the Camarilla until the Convention of Prague in 2012. She was introduced as the child of Colin Griffin, the sheriff of Portland, before the departure of Clan Bruja. She knows James Merrick on a more personal level. She knows that James, for the most part, has been a sympathetic prince to the Anarch cause. He hasn't forced the Anarchs to get out of the city. He hasn't called blood hunts. He has allowed the Anarchs to police themselves with minor reporting back. His child, Mason, acts as an envoy between the Camarilla and the Anarchs, and for the most part, he's kept the majority of the Camarilla high rollers off of the Anarchs' back. Then, there's Damien, the newest, youngest member of the city itself. His sire, Deacon Royce, has never been a member of the city's council, but has always been a trusted advisor to the prince himself. Not Merrick. 10 years before this night, Merrick's sire used to be in charge of the city before his mysterious disappearance. Deacon Royce was always a loyal member of the Camarilla since its inception. He was a La Sombra anti-tribute. This child, however, has been embraced into a new world where the La Sombra seem to be coming and going. Not trusted, but coming and going. And he understands how exactly it is to be an outsider inside of an organization that you hold dear. He hasn't had many visitations with the prince, other than his acceptance that he was to be embraced. Damien Hargrave has yet to be released, for he's only a couple of months embraced. After taking time to memorize each of the characters' faces, the prince nods. Introduce yourselves. The prince listens to their introductions, without reaction, without interruption. Once upon a time, Kindred ruled the land, seizing whatever they desired, fashioning their own personal realities and killing anyone who stood in their way. We were all blood gods. That was until about 500 years ago when the Camarilla was formed. In modern nights, the Second Inquisition has gutted this city. The few of us who survived did so because of two things. Do you know what those two things are? This was not a rhetorical question. He waits to see if any of the characters actually had a guess. A few of them tried to post up masquerade and things like that, sounding as if they were trying to kiss the Camarilla's ass. Caution and restraint, Merrick filled in. Merrick opens a folder. Inside are photographs that he spins around and slides to the far side of the table so the coterie can see. Therefore, I will not abide acts like these in my city. The series of photographs depict a dead man dressed in a long wool coat, laying like a rag doll in red grass. He has a deep gash running through his neck, as if someone tried to tear his head off. His left arm is broken at the wrist. He's missing his right. The crime photos are graphic and taken during the day, and reflect the shared dream experience to the characters. His name is Stephen Schumann, a public prosecutor. Someone killed him earlier this morning, outside the Chinese tower in the English Garden. His arm was used to write this. Merrick shows another photo, with the Hekata clan symbol, drawn on the side of the wall of the Chinese tower. Schumann's severed arm is also in the photograph in its own puddle of blood on the ground next to the painting, as if haphazardly tossed after use. The Prince of Portland gives the coterie a hard look. If I believed you did this, you'd already be stacked like cordwood and set on fire. I understand that you have a relationship forming with the Giovanni. Clearly this is one of theirs, or at least someone who wants me to think it is. So I'm officially making this your problem. You're going to find out who did this and bring the person or persons responsible to me. You will do this, and I will continue to believe that the Giovanni are worthwhile guests in my city. Otherwise, I will take no chances and rid myself of the issue. In this, Monroth speaks with my voice. Now get out. At this point, the characters all are led outside by Mason. Monroth stays behind to speak with Dracon in the corner, who never takes his eyes off Sam. Outside, the characters kind of huddle up and discuss what they should do. They agree that this is something that needs to be looked into. It could very well, as much as they would like to just dump this off as a Camarilla problem, this is a problem for the entire vampire community. It has nothing to do with the Ivory Tower itself. And they decide that they do need to look into this because they could very well be implicated by this. None of them, however, have shared the fact that they had this dream. Not yet, at least. Mason comes up to them and offers Tinia a business card. The card is for the Portland Police Department, and it has his name, Detective Arthur Lawrence Mason. He does legitimately work for the police department, and he very well could be a key to solving a lot of these issues because he can gain them entry into places that they typically would not be allowed in. Now, when you're playing Styx and Bones directly out of the book, there are pre-made characters in here, and some of them have health connections and police connections. I was trying to make up for the fact that none of these characters were built for that manner, and it would have been a lot harder for them to actually gain entry to a lot of the places that they needed to get to solve these problems. The first thing that our coterie has decided to do is get their belongings back, which Mason was able to take them to the place and get their phones and weapons and things like that back. They were just not allowed to have that in the Elysium while they were going to talk to the prince. Not to mention there's no telling who might be tracking their phones. So after retrieving their belongings, they all decide that they're going to check Stephen Schumann's office at City Hall. On the way, however, they do stop at the park to check out the crime scene. It's all taped off. There's still a huge mess. But there's no one there except for a simple guard that Mason is able to give a coffee break with some simple dominate use. The players enter the scene of the crime and check out their surroundings. Tinia heads upstairs and finds some fragmented pieces of broken glass, which she's able to decide are left over from where the cell phone hit the ground. Damien spends his time examining the graffiti on the side of the wall, which represents Clan Hekata. It is 3 faces bound next to each other, which represent the Greek goddess Hekate, goddess of death and the crossroads, goddess of sorcery. Sam, on the other hand, is trying to figure out as much as he can while following the other group members around and seeing exactly what they can find, seeing if he can be of any help. Dawn decides to use her powers of Auspex with Sense the Unseen, looking through the veil to see if there's anything here. She does see several wraiths in the area which she doesn't have the ability to speak to, who, once they notice she's watching them, quickly back away to avoid being noticed. The other thing that she does find is where the body landed on the ground, she finds what seems like an otherworldly fleshy sack made out of ectoplasm and what the players wouldn't know as pathos. Both Dawn and Sam know from a previous misadventure that when someone dies and they cross over into the Shadowlands, they arrive bound in a placenta-like sack until they're released. it takes a little bit of memory jogging for Rose to realize that this is probably what that is. And it releases so much energy. This is the energy of death being trapped in a small area. After examining the site well, they hop back in the van and begin to head over to Stephen Schumann's place of work, being a public prosecutor, and heading over to the city hall. After leaving the park, as they're driving over to the city hall building to check Schumann's office, Mason goes over with them details that they do have. That Schumann is 39 years old. He's single and he lives alone in apartments. That he was born in Kentucky and he has studied legal theory at Portland University. That he completed his state examination with the highest possible marks and was also awarded a doctorate of law from the University of Portland as well in 2013. As a prosecutor for the city of Portland, he's mostly handled non-violent financial crimes and earned a decent conviction record in the process. His most notable convictions include a pollution case against Enron, price fixing against a pharmaceutical company, and financial crimes against day traders at the stock exchange. He was not religious, nor was he ever married, and he seems to be a rather boring human being. So on the way to City Hall, Brittany, Dawn's touchstone, contacts Sam via text to ask if Dawn happens to be there, because Dawn still doesn't have her goddamn cell phone on her. It seems to be a character quirk of hers where she just never remembers to bring it, or loses it, or something. She just never has her cell phone. The reason why she's contacting is because someone had sent her a bouquet of dead flowers. And part of her was thinking it might be Dawn. The other part is thinking that it might be some kind of weird stalker threat or something. After some conversation, Dawn decides that she's going to head over to the hookah lounge to make sure Brittany's okay while the others check the office. So at that point, our group splits up. Damien, being a friend of Mason's in life, they both served in the military together, takes the van that Mason has been driving them around in with Dawn and whisks her off to the hookah lounge. Sam, also feeling like he needs to keep Brittany safe because he has personal interest in keeping her alive, given the fact that she is the name on the title of the property that he now owns, hires bodyguards to go watch her as well. At this point, things get a little bit interesting because the original idea is they're going to march up to the front doors, they're going to bang on them, and when somebody opens the door, Mason's going to flash his badge, get inside, and they're going to check out Schumann's office. However, no one answers the door for one reason or another. Trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do, because Mason does not want to break in to this place, and they don't really want to have to call in favors to open up the building after hours. While checking around the outside of the building, Tinia does find a second-story window open. Using Soaring Leap, she gets in with minor injuries to herself and is able to stealthily work around the headphone-wearing janitors to get downstairs and open the doors to let the group in. She does. The badge flashing happens as originally planned before. They get into the office and they start snooping around. Around the time they get in, Damien and Rose arrive at the hookah bar. They get there before the bodyguards. Damien enters, Dawn follows and obfuscate, and there's about 2 dozen people inside the hookah bar at the moment. Brittany is seen at the counter working, and off to the side also can be seen Hesha, the ministry member. While in obfuscate, Rose wanders over to her mentor, where Hesha greets her, knowing that she's there regardless of not breaking obfuscate, and says that he's there to try to keep an eye on her until his personal guard, Raphael, will arrive and keep an eye on her himself so that Hesha can attend to business. That's about all that happens with that one. They decide that the trip was pointless, there was enough guards on her, and they go to leave. While they're on their way back to meet up with the coterie, however, they're checking Stephen Schumann's office. They don't find much remarkable. It's a legal office. The one strange thing that they do find in the office is a picture of Schumann shaking hands with James Merrick, a Prince of Portland. This could be an important clue, but the picture is also among other photos of him with other potentially important financial bigwigs in Portland. And it could just be a coincidence. Who knows? In his desk, they do find a bottle of bourbon and a couple of glasses and some paperwork, which they take pictures of. While Tinia does the majority of the grunt work and Mason just stands around making sure that no one comes in while the coterie does their job, Sam hacks into the computer trying to find anything that he can there. Not much can be found that can't be found in the paperwork, so Sam decides to go about planting the seeds for possible aliases later in the future for himself. After leaving City Hall, they decide that they're going to head down to the Alan Prescott Memorial Hospital, where Stephen Schumann's body is being held in the morgue for the investigation. They make their way over there. They send a text over to Damien explaining where they're going to be, and they make their way down to the morgue. At the morgue, they run into Pete, who is a morgue technician that Mason seems to be acquainted with. After some small talk, Mason explains that they need to see the effects of the body, and if he could please bring them up, giving them the chance to have a good look at the body for themselves. Examining the body is not a big surprise. It's a man's body. He has a massive gash in his throat. Its left arm's broken. Its right arm is severed. Looking at it, it all seems that everything is done in brute force. The gash along the neck seems to possibly have been done by some wild animal, like a gnawing. But they are able to take a nice look at that. By the time Pete gets back, Damien and Dawn have arrived as well, making their way past security and getting into the morgue itself. Dawn is still in obfuscate at this point in time, but she's whispering into the ears of the coterie members as things are happening. When Pete arrives, he's carrying a clear bucket that has an incredibly damaged and bloodied suit, a wool coat, a watch, a wallet, and a damaged cell phone. The cell phone is taken, and Sam takes the cell phone and hooks it up to the computer to see if there's anything that he can get off of it. While he's in there, Mason also suggests that he goes into the files and makes sure that he erases anything that the coterie decides that they're going to take for the investigation. Tinia pockets the watch, which is a wristwatch, a Rolex, with an engraving on the inside of it that says, basically thanking Schumann for 5 years of service from the city of Portland. Other than that, there's really nothing much on the body. His wallet came up empty. There was nothing really interesting on his phone. And as Pete was coming back from Mason asking him to go get coffee for the group, they're heading out. So they take their coffee to go. At which point, they're all trying to figure out exactly what the next plan of action should be, and they have decided to go see the Hekata. They have Mason drop them back off at the Benson Hotel, and Mason drives off to go find the officer who took down the report for the body's pickup, basically to dominate him into forgetting that the watch existed. Getting back into Damien's SUV, they drive back over to the Hekata temple, where they are greeted on the steps by Mother Anya. After being ushered inside into a more private area, Damien decides that he's going to speak to Martin Luther Black, his tutor in the necromantic arts. Anya says that she finds it difficult to believe that her family is responsible for this, but she does agree with the prince. They need to look into this for their own security, and the best do it without the prying eyes of the Camarilla. Everybody in the coterie is happy that Damien has decided to scoot off before she said that. She also tells the coterie that they have whatever support that she can muster, but in the meantime, she's going to try to develop an exit strategy in case the prince makes good on his threats. While discussing with Mother Anya what was going on, Dawn spoke up and explained that she had a vision also while they were at the park investigating the crime scene. That this strange sack that once held the wraith of Stephen Schumann had these red tendrils coming out of it and just whipping all over the place. She couldn't actually see how many there were because there was so much movement, but one of them definitely connected into her. Mother Anya suggested that they go speak to Mora, who, upon entering the sanctum, they saw Mora just erratically moving around and seemed to be talking to themselves. When they enter the room, Mora turns to them and says, "I had the same vision you did. We are connected, them, thee, and me. We used our blood to reach into the underworld. It is not impossible that when we rescued Constancia, that something else used the gateway as well. Something that moves and acts like the Kindred with full access to our particular gifts. Perhaps a specter, possessed of a burning rage, seeking to unleash its wrath on some soul or souls, a vendetta, born of some grudge. So you must find the victim, this Stephen Schumann, and learn everything you can about him. You find his crime, and you may yet find the adversary." This was incredibly cryptic, obviously, and they kept trying to talk to Mora, but Mora was just lost in everything. Dawn decided at that point that she was going to go find Damien, figure out exactly what he was doing, and as the others were trying to catch up, they heard a man humming from one of the rooms. When they peeked their head inside, Constancia excitedly invites them in. The shell of Gunther Hildebrandt is completely surrounded by books all over the place. The ancient vampire occupying his body smiles at the coterie, beckoning them to come inside. The priestess of bones is slow to move and speaks as she remembers how. While Constancia has no knowledge of the Schumann murder, she does answer some rather broad questions. She says that everything is so strange, familiar yet not. I remember fragments of my life from long ago, my sire Japheth, my childer Ambrogino, and the one calling himself Decamden, Augustus in his betrayal. I remember almost nothing of how I died or the Tempest, save shards of it is difficult to describe. Like a song when you only know the melody or chorus. To know each and every one of them, sharing in their pain, and they, so very aware of mine, connected and terrible. But this world, this new world, this new age full of magic and wonder and awe, Mora has begun to illuminate me. But it is all so very overwhelming. So much history, so much death and destruction. To have once been so powerful and now so small, so fragile, lost in the voices. The elder became distracted, returning to her books. They didn't really get much from Constancia. She was just kind of obsessed with the way the world works now. One of the things that Constancia was doing was petting a light bulb until the fingers started to sizzle because it was so interesting and that the lamp was such a strange new invention to her. She picks up a goblet and starts dipping her fingers in the blood to make them heal as she's licking them clean. Now, also what's going on at this point in time in the other room, as Tinia and Sam are discussing, or at least trying to discuss things with Constancia, Dawn has caught up to Sam, who is in the middle of a necromantic ritual with Luther Black. They have decided that they're going to summon the soul of Stephen Schumann and get exactly what happened from his mouth. Now, this is great, but now at this point I want to catch you guys up on an out-of-character detail, and that's with Damien's player David. I offered him a way he wanted to handle his oblivion when it came to learning ceremonies, because you cannot learn a ceremony unless you have specific abilities in oblivion, which at this point he had Cloak of Shadows, or Shadow Cloak. At this point he had like Shadow Cloak. So the offering that I gave him was he could keep the power that he has now and learn Summon Spirit at the cost that it wouldn't actually work right. He didn't have the ability to find fetters, so he would have to basically be luck of the draw on whether or not what he was using was a fetter, or he would have to find somebody who give him fetters. And also, it would not exactly call wraiths, it would summon specters, which are a lot harder to work with and are just fucking psychotic. The other options I gave him, however, were being able to buy this level of necromancy, which was bind the fetter, or the binding fetter, which allows you to find fetters and therefore be able to use the summon soul ability as the next level of obtenebration, so that he would be able to buy it as, I think it would be his level 3 for him, or level 4. Or we could do something in character to try to replace Shadow Cloak with the necromantic level equivalent, which was which was the binding fetter. He chose that route. He wanted to be able to replace the obtenebration he already had. So what I did was I had Martin Luther Black mix a vile concoction of ashes and fetid congealed blood, take it, have him activate all of his obtenebration and try to force it into his eyes as he slammed it into his face, and he took an aggravated damage. With that mostly ceremonial theatrical event, he was then able to locate fetters by activating the oblivion use of his eyes, and he was able to then summon the spirit of Stephen Schumann, who they questioned about the events from the morning before. Using this, they were able to find out that the attacker was roughly 6 feet tall, with 4 splayed shadowy arms, and the figure was clearly a master of the Oblivion discipline. So it was either a Lasombra or a Hekata or something else that had access to those powers. Damien then decided to keep questioning Schumann and then ask him if he wanted to help him, causing Stevens to lose a little bit of himself in his rage of having his life taken away from him. He didn't have much, but what he had, he thought was well. Boring of a person or not, he seemed to have his own personal accomplishments that he was proud of. He wanted to see his attacker suffer, and he would lose himself in rage, where the wraith would present itself as darker and his eyes would glow red, his shadow coming to the fore. The missing arm of Stephen Schumann was still missing in the Shadowlands, but it would glitch in and out of existence from time to time as they spoke. And eventually he became so exhausted that there's nothing in the books that says anything like this, because you don't summon Stephen, you don't summon the victim in this book. This was something that my players came up with, which I was very, very excited about. But I had him basically become exhausted and retreat into his fetter. He retreated into the Watch, which was just basically an Easter egg for myself and anybody else who knew. But in Wraith the Oblivion, one of your fetters could be known as a conduit if, in very rare circumstances, if your character was a risen, which is basically a wraith who has crawled its way out of the grave or recreated its body out of dust particles or whatever. There's a couple different ways to become a risen. In the case of a risen, however, your soul has the chance of receding into one of your fetters, making it a conduit. The conduit is typically where the shadow stays in the physical world. If you retreat into the fetter, it's more of a healing process, but your shadow takes over the body, and your malevolent specter self is running rampant in the world, trying to make life horrible for you. I wasn't doing anything like that exactly, but I did want to give off the chance that if this guy did ever, for some reason, become a risen, because there's lots of weird necromancy shit going on, that there is a chance that that watch would be his conduit, and that he could retreat into that if needed. That's about where game ended. They did the ritual, and they decided to regroup the next night to try to figure out exactly what was going on with this case, because the night was dragging on, the sun was going to be up soon, and they needed to get to safety. With that, we're going to continue on our next game session, Chapter 3, The Price We Pay, which I'm massively, massively excited about, because I'm loving this story so damn much, and I think the players are doing a phenomenal job, and I know they're enjoying it. One of my favorite things that a player has said so far is Serendipity, which is Dawn's player, came up to me after game one night and said, "I love the fact that everybody's equally fucked." Now, the massive difference I've always said exists between a dungeon master and a storyteller is I'm not out to kill my players. I want them to survive. I'm putting them through these traumatic events that could very well lead to them being killed, but I'm not actually trying to harm them in any way, because this is so much fun to me, and I'd rather see players progress and have powerful characters who end up being major power players in the city that I'm running, instead of having to start with neonates every other game session. It's just not something that I'm interested in. So the fact that the players are having as much fun with this fun World of Darkness constructed story of intrigue is just, it's so great. And if any of you are looking for a supplement to run, I highly suggest Styx and Bones, because it is so much fun. It is just such a great plot line. I actually did run the Vampire the Masquerade Starter Chronicle for 5th edition a while back ago, which I plan on talking about very soon. That's Cults of the Blood Gods. I don't know where it is. Anyway, I have the printed out thing, which basically runs you from newly embraced vampires getting introduced to the city, and it's all very done well. But Styx and Bones fits well into any chronicle. If you've already got an existing storyline, all you have to do is really figure out why your characters are interacting with the Hekata at all. In my case, they were hired on as bodyguards to a foreign dignitary, the Asanos, or Hiramitsu Asano, and they've just gotten pulled deeper and deeper into this tangled web that the Hekata are forcing in on them, and it's causing strange interactions with the Anarchs and the Camarilla and their sires and their own personal rivals, and it's causing so much just stress with that. Oh, in fact, also during the night, I think it was while they were on their way to the morgue, Tinia also received a text message from her brother stating that there were bullet holes outside of his apartment, and it felt like it was intentional. Tinia, her younger brother, gets into some trouble from time to time, but he said that he was going to stay at a friend's house away from things. So we've got some touchstones who seem to be getting threats put upon them. In that same vein, when the when the bodyguards arrived to make sure that Brittany was okay, they were very strange to find a Italian gentleman who seemed to be watching her also, which is Raphael, one of Hesh's retainers. But anyway, like I said, I'm just very excited. I know I'm just rambling on and on and on about this, but I'm just having such a great time running this plot line. And chapter 3 is going to be so much fun. I believe, I want to double check, there are 5 chapters to this plot line. It is said that this plot is going to run about, what was it? I think Styx and Stones is supposed to run about 12. Sorry. Styx and Stones is supposed to run about 10 to 15 hours. We are on chapter 3, and we are at 12 hours now. So I'm pretty sure that this is going to run a lot longer than that. As it is, we play for about the idea is 4 hours a night. When most of the time we end up going to 5. But if that's the case, like I try to focus on a chapter per game night. I hope you guys are enjoying this. If you're not, fuck it, I'm doing it anyway, because this is my diary, basically, to help me remember what I need to know before the next game session. Today is Thursday, which means tomorrow, game night, and we get to do chapter 3. So excited about that. I hope everybody has a good evening, and I will see you next time in our World of Darkness. Thank you.